Hello everybody, welcome to More Chainsaws Needed, where, because I love horror, thrillers and suspense, I am going to talk, rant, rave about, review and recommend movies, TV series and books in those genres for you guys as I draw. As we're getting back to the normal schedule, we continue our trip to the classic Universal monsters. Last time I called them the original boy band of nightmares, and well, that is completely true. Yes, hey, our subject last video was Dracula, the leader, the handsome heartthrob that makes all the fans swoon and is the most popular and the one that has the most merchandise done about him. But that doesn't mean that he's the only one with a big fandom. Today's subject is the sensitive guy, the one who can melt our hearts with his soft side, but can also be frightened when threatened. Frankenstein's monster. The novel was written in 1880 and had a film adaptation outside Universal in 1910, but unfortunately that one was lost for a long time. While it has been found since then, it's not that known. So the one that we are going to be tackling today is 1931's Frankenstein, which came out a little bit after Dracula's first movie and starred the Frankenstein monster, the great Boris Karloff. And just for a little bit of contrast, we will also talk about the spiritual successor to Bram Stoker's Dracula, produced by Coppola but directed by Kenneth Branagh, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from 1994. Just like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster is so well known that pretty much everyone has heard about him. We have seen him in a lot of movies, either as the star or as a part of an ensemble of evil monsters, although let's be honest, he's usually the token good monster who would end up helping the side of good rather than remain evil, especially in the comedies. And as part of 1,000 parodies too, including Meeting Abbott and Costello, The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, and The Simpsons. That is not even mentioning how he also became a family man in the monsters, even if he's called Herman Monster there. We all know Herman is good old Frankenstein's monster with another name, and an excellent butler for the Addams and as Lurch. And yes, I am being careful of calling the creature Frankenstein monster, because we're also going to talk about Victor Frankenstein, and I don't want to confuse both of them. As I mentioned before, the novel was written in 1818 by Mary Shelley, and originally published anonymously, as Shelley knew that people would not accept a novel with such a grisly subject if they knew it had been written by a woman. Something that was pretty true because, as the critics who had praised it, the anonymous novel suddenly changed their minds when they knew an 18-year-old girl had written it. Wonder why. A play, loosely based on the novel, was written in 1923, and was the only adaptation that Mary Shelley was able to see in life. This play changed a lot of the text in order to make it possible to present it on a stage, and added a character that is now pretty much impossible to separate from Frankenstein and the creature. The hunchbacked assistant, who so happens not to be named Igor yet. So the changes began. Lots of changes that have been cemented in pop culture as absolute truths to the original book, to the point that the original book might be completely unrecognizable for those who only know the movies. To begin with, well, Dr. Frankenstein? Not a doctor. Victor is in fact a dropout from college who thought he was too cool for school. I'm not sure exactly when he went from dropout to doctorate. Yes, he probably bought that diploma. But nowadays it's hard to find an adaptation of parody that doesn't call him Dr. Frankenstein. He also didn't make the creature, which was only called the monster in later films, with parts of dead bodies in the novel. He robbed some graves, yes, but we don't know what for, as he clearly states that he made his creature from scratch, and that the reason why it was so big was because he needed the space to work the smaller parts of the human body. Oh, and he never had any control of his creature, not really. He was a mad scientist, yes, but not the competent kind. Then there are the changes to the creature, and oh boy did he had some. Because, for example, while now we are completely familiarized with Boris Karloff's amazing makeup as manners as the Frankenstein monster, the novel described the creature as beautiful before it's animated. To be quite honest, I'd say that Victor was a little bit in love with his creation, the way he describes it as an anime pretty boy, or more precisely, a Byron-esque man all the way to luscious long black hair. What made the creature monstrous was his eyes that were inhuman. Basically, Shelley was describing the uncanny valley effect without having the vocabulary. The creature being an ugly mismatch of parts came with the makeup popularized by Karloff. Another thing that was changed was that in the original, the creature was not mute, nor stupid. In fact, in the novel, we can argue that the creature was the smartest character around, as once he escapes the lab where he was created, he manages to learn English and French by spying on a family that was teaching someone else French. And that's a long, long story that pretty much every adaptation skips or summarizes, as the Kenneth Branagh did. Not only that, but later, with the help of a blind man, he learns to read, and among the books that he reads is the Divine Comedy, which helps him to also learn philosophy and understand exactly what was wrong with what Frankenstein did by abandoning him. And then, instead of just killing blindly or by accident, he goes into a revenge rampage explicitly against the Frankenstein family, because he understands that they are the ones who hurt him. Oh, and he's also super strong, super fast, and super agile. Nothing like the lumbering creature we have come to adore. So where does the slow, lumbering, and mute creature comes from? Well, originally from the play I mentioned, named Presumption or The Fate of Frankenstein. However, even if the play was the origin of a lot of similar things, pretty much no one alive has ever seen it, so it is not as if it's very known in pop culture. However, yes, hey, I am going to say that it was the basis for the 1931 movie, which completely cemented how Frankenstein will be seen from then on, thanks to the amazing acting by Boris Karloff and the incredibly makeup by Jack Pierce, who was responsible for many of the classic Universal Monsters looks, so we will talk about him a lot later on. The movie follows the play lead in that they take out the framing device of the novel, which is why a lot of people don't know that Frankenstein had a framing device to begin with. I find this incredibly funny, as said framing device was Mary Shelley being absolutely clear on what the point of the whole novel was. Don't go chasing great advances in science without considering the consequence of your acts. Or, as another fictional scientist one put it, you scientists care so much about what you can do that you don't stop thinking about if you should do it. Which has been completely forgotten by pretty much every single adaptation of the book in one way or another. However, from then on, they start their own changes that have been quite cemented for pop culture. Fritz is a good example. Our proto-Igor in the play was a kind man who cared about Victor Frankenstein and was afraid that his creature would be the end of him. Oh, and he survives the play too, which can't be said of the Fritz in the movie. The Fritz of the movie is closer to what we know as Igor, fanatically loyal to Victor Frankenstein, but at the same time cruel for absolutely no reason to the creature, bullying him and lashing at him at every possible time, which is what causes the creature to kill him in self-defense. Because the Frankenstein of this movie is not an unrepentant killer, which is probably why of all the Universal monsters, he is usually the one who gets to become the token good guy. In fact, at least at the beginning before the creature kills Fritz, Henry Frankenstein, remember they changed his name because Victor was too severe of a name for a main character. 1931 Hollywood sure had funny ideas. Henry insists that they all have to be patient with his creation because he's barely a week old, and thus he's just learning how to be a person. It's a bit sad that the movie must be quite fast on the action because that patience is completely missing in the book. Victor Frankenstein takes one look at his creation moving and immediately decides that he wants nothing to do with him as he's ugly. How did his perfect, beautiful creation become ugly by just moving is one more clue that, the problem with the creature was that he was too close to human without being human, causing the uncanny valley to set in, not that he was actually ugly. Because seriously, if he was ugly, I think that Victor would have, and Henry too, would have noticed before animating the creature. Anyway, Henry Frankenstein, in comparison, is at first a doting father, proud of his success on creating life and trying hard to take responsibility for his son. One of the best known scenes of this movie is probably the best example of this innocence that Frankenstein sees in his creature. The first time that the creature sees the sunlight and innocently tries to catch it with his big hands. That single moment shows us that the creature understands beauty, And Frankenstein sees this until the moment when the creature kills Fritz, despite knowing that Fritz bullied and tortured the creature. And then he's convinced that yes, the creature is a monster because he used an abnormal brain. This is, by the way, also an invasion of the movie that has stayed with the creature ever since then. It was probably an attempt to say that criminal brains are different and that had the creature had a normal brain, he wouldn't have become violent. But unfortunately, since all the deaths are on planet and most of them are in self-defense, that particular message is thankfully lost. The 1931 movie was pretty much the blueprint for all Frankenstein versions, both serious and comedic, until Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in 1994, a movie directed and starred by Kenneth Branagh as a sort of spiritual sequel to Bram Stoker's Dracula, because it was also produced by Francis Ford Coppola, who was originally going to direct. This movie takes more of the original book, reinstating the bookend sequence in the Arctic, for example, but at the same time, in a lot of places, puts the sympathy completely with Frankenstein and not with his creation, which changes the message a bit. This version's first look we have of the creature is in the shadow, when he kills a bunch of slug dogs when it could have just scared them away. Right then and there, we know that the narrative doesn't want us to see the creature as completely innocent, as it's hard to like someone whose introduction is killing dogs. In movies, you know who the evil one is when they kill a dog. It's a law. And from there, we start getting a long, and I mean long, sequence in which we get to know everything about Victor's life before he created the creature. This is designated to make us try and understand his obsession and his actions so that we will think that he is right and that his only sin was to be too fixated in trying to help humanity the wrong way. There is also this weird thing in which they changed Elizabeth from being his cousin and fiancée to being his adopted sister and fiancée, but I still have no idea why they thought that that was somehow better. The more faithful to the book part is contested because, well, Victor here somehow does finish his education to take on his father's practice and also lets us know exactly how he made the creature, when he had also said that no one should know what he did or how he did it, lest they try to repeat it. One common thing in both versions, Victor changes his mind so quickly, it almost seems as if he really doesn't think things through at all. For example, after deciding not to make the creature a companion, because, oh my god, no, that would be horrible, he still goes on and revives Elizabeth. A thing that never even came to his mind in the book, by the way. By then, he had actually learned his lesson. But here, in the movie, oh, this time it's going to work. Sure, Victor. Of course. Of course it doesn't. But let's go back to the creature. Now, this Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is very interesting because he's the only one who did not use the best parts for his creature. In fact, he used an anti-vaxxer criminal, the leg from a cholera victim, which I still don't know why, since the body of the anti-vaxxer was pretty much complete. He didn't need anything extra. And the brain of his mentor, who was actually the one who created the process to bring back dead things to life. Because in this case, Victor is not that bright. And there is a problem here with this. I mentioned how the 1931 sort of tried to imply that because the brain that Henry used was of a criminal, then that meant that the creature was doomed to be evil. However, in this case, the brain used is a perfectly sane individual. Well, okay, yes, he was a mad scientist, but he was a mad scientist who had repented. And for some reason, they imply that the knowledge of this original brain is still in the creature. In fact, while the book clearly states that the creature has to learn to read and speak, in this case, the creature relearns to speak and read, and even is mentioned that he knows how to play the flute without being talked to, because the Frankenstein's mentor knew how to. This is a problem because it implies that the creature is not innocent. It's not an innocent newborn. It is actually just the revived professor relearning how to be himself. And this is a problem because, well, it comes back when Elizabeth is revived, because Elizabeth seems to get all her memory back even if she can barely talk. So this comes to, is the creature actually Frankenstein's mentor? Or is he really a completely new person? Dialogue points to the latter because the creature considers himself a completely different being. But Elizabeth's revival points to the first option. So if that was true, as I said, no, the creature was not really a creation of Victor and thus was never actually innocent. So we do not have lost innocence from the creature. We have lost innocence from Frankenstein. And yet the creature was innocent a little bit, at least for a while before he relearned to read and thus learned the truth of his origin. I mentioned he stole Victor's diary. When we watch him being chased by the mob of Ingolstadt, because of course there cannot be a Frankenstein movie without an angry mob, and this one has a lot of those. And later, when he's trying to help the family who lives in the farm where he hid, we can see the same innocent creature that Boris Karloff showed us. One that has no idea what is the meaning of his life and who only wants one thing: companionship. And I want to be clear, originally the creature wants companionship and friendship, not love. Love and lust came later. Of course, he's treated like a monster again when he kills a man trying to help the blind protector of the family he was trying to befriend, and the family gets really scared and abandons the farm to get away from him. That is when he snaps and the body count grows because, oh my god, this creature is bloodthirsty. He murders 3 people with his own hands, and 1 extra dies because of his direct actions in a way in which he planned it. He actually planted evidence of one of the murders in Justine, Frankenstein's maid, and that made another angry mob, because again, angry mobs, decide that she was the killer, and they lynched her very graphically in this movie. The thing is, the creature was planning this lynching in order to give Victor the raw materials for a wife. And later, when Victor refuses, he kills Elizabeth, knowing very well that Victor was going to do the stupid thing of trying to revive her and thus create a wife. In this case, the creature is incredibly manipulative, and thus it makes it very hard to sympathize with him, even when he cries at the death of Frankenstein, because of what he did before. This makes him the cruelest version of Frankenstein's creature that we have ever seen on film. And maybe that is why the movie was not that popular. I mean, the movie is a mess, but that feeling that Frankenstein is not innocent is unique for this movie, and I think that is very well why it was so disliked. Frankenstein is one of those classic books that everyone thinks they know, but yet very few have read. I can't recommend it enough, as it's a thrilling read, and if all you know about the creature is the pop culture image we have of him, you will be surprised. Yes, even if you watched Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and know that the creature speaks, it is a very, very different story from what Mr. Branagh Sago showed us on the screen. And I also recommend hunting the original 1931 movie because it's a classic for a reason. And Mr. Karloff's portrayal seriously deserved an Oscar. His creature speaks volumes without saying a single word. On the other hand, I really can't recommend the 1994 movie unless you have a crush on early 19th Kenneth Branagh or Helena Bonham Carter and want to see the former shirtless a lot and the latter in her usual corsets, but younger. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessica, and Ali Riley, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda and the most amazing Amy Sung, without whom none of my videos would be possible. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Atalisa, with a link on description, as I know my name can be hard to spell, and with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else, and get the chance to suggest future subjects for videos. You can also support me through Ko-fi, and for each coffee, you will get mentioned in 3 future videos. If you can't support me on this way, I also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. This was Adalisa Zarate, and remember, there is not a problem in the horror genre that can't be solved with more chainsaws and a cup of good coffee.